My name is Martha Harlow. I'm 77 years old. For most of my life, that statement would have been followed by a list of other people's needs. Wife to Derek for 46 years, mother to Adam, grandmother to Kieran and Chloe. My days were a tapestry woven from threads that belonged to everyone but me: school runs that turned into grocery runs, retirement savings that became down payments on their first home, quiet afternoons sacrificed for last-minute babysitting. Derek used to say I had a servant's heart, and he meant it as the highest compliment. After he passed, that heart kept beating in the same rhythm of service, but the person it served, my son Adam, had forgotten the melody. He and his wife, Lisa, heard only the percussion of their own demanding lives, and I was just the steady, predictable beat in the background. They said, "Stay in the lounge, Grandma. We'll come back for you after check-in." I nodded. Of course I did. That's what you do when your son gives you an instruction in that clipped, over-patient voice, the one reserved for the elderly, the confused, and the inconvenient. I sat where they told me, on a stiff vinyl chair next to a dusty ficus benjamina, its leaves drooping with the same weary resignation I felt settling into my bones. It was 9:15 a.m. at the Wilmington International Airport. The air hummed with the nervous energy of departures, a sound I used to love. I had waited 8 hours. I'd packed 3 days before, laying out every outfit on the guest room bed with the same care I once took for Adam's school trips. The tickets were to Honolulu, our big family vacation, as Lisa had branded it. She'd insisted on matching t-shirts for the grandchildren and me. Mine, a lurid shade of coral, proclaimed Vacation Nana in bubbly white letters. I felt like a billboard for a role I was no longer sure I wanted to play, but I wore it. To keep the peace. That had become my silent mantra. At the security line, things started to feel off. Lisa kept glancing at her watch, her smile as thin and brittle as a sugar wafer. Adam was unusually quiet, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on some point beyond my shoulder. The kids, Kieran and Chloe, were lost in the blue glow of their phones, islands of adolescent indifference. When the TSA agent asked about our seating arrangements, Lisa had laughed, a tinkling, artificial sound. "Oh, we'll sort that out at the gate." And that was the last time any of them looked me in the eye. Once we were through the metal detectors and the chaos of reshoeing and repacking, Lisa turned to me, her manicured hand resting briefly on my arm. It wasn't a gesture of affection, it was a dismissal. "Mom, why don't you find a nice seat in the lounge here? It's much quieter. We'll go ahead and check the bags, sort the kids' boarding passes, and then come right back to get you. Just relax. You've done enough." I sat. I waited. I watched them merge with the river of travelers and disappear around a corner. After an hour, a prickle of unease started in my stomach. I stood and paced a small circuit from the potted plant to the window overlooking the tarmac. After 2 hours, I asked the attendant at the lounge's front desk to page Adam Harlow. No response. The announcement echoed through the terminal, my son's name dissolving into the general din. By the 4th hour, I stopped looking toward the entrance. People around me came and went. A young couple argued in whispers and then made up. A businessman took a loud conference call. The woman across from me ate a salad, read half a book, and left for her gate. I remained, a fixed point in a world of motion. It wasn't until 5 p.m., when the afternoon sun slanted low through the high windows, turning dust motes into drifting gold, that I approached the desk again. The kindness in the young woman's eyes was almost my undoing. I gave her Adam's full name, the flight number, the destination. She typed, her brow furrowed. Then she hesitated, her gaze lifting to meet mine with a careful, gentle pity. "Ma'am," she said softly. "The 1:45 p.m. flight to Honolulu, it's already departed. It left over 3 hours ago." I nodded, my head feeling strangely light. "Could you repeat that, please?" She did, slowly, her voice a balm. "They checked in and boarded. The flight has departed." So that was it. Not an accident. Not a miscommunication. I knew my son. Adam was a lot of things: thoughtless, self-absorbed, perpetually stressed, but he was not careless. He was a project manager. His life was a series of meticulously planned steps. This was not an oversight, It was a line item that had been deliberately deleted. I walked to the nearest restroom, locked myself in a stall, and sat on the closed toilet lid. I didn't cry. The tears were frozen somewhere deep inside, a glacier of quiet grief I didn't have the warmth to melt. I just needed to sit where no one would ask if I was all right, where I could be invisible for a few moments and let the cold, hard fact of it settle. When I emerged, the airport was shifting into its evening rhythm. The frantic buzz had mellowed to a weary hum. I walked to the main departure screen, a vast wall of flickering letters and numbers. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I simply stood there like a woman scanning a menu in a diner, looking at the options. And then I saw it. Portland, 7:35 p.m. I don't know why I chose it. Maybe because I hadn't seen the Pacific Northwest in decades. Maybe because it was where Derek and I had spent a rainy, romantic anniversary once. Maybe because it was the furthest thing I could imagine from the relentless sunshine of Hawaii. I walked to the ticket counter. "One ticket to Portland, please," I said, my voice steady. The young man behind the counter hesitated. "Round trip?" "No," I said, the word feeling clean and sharp in my mouth. "Just one way." I used my own debit card from my own small account. The one I'd kept open since before Derek died, a little bit of emergency money he'd always insisted on. Adam didn't know about it. It held just enough for the flight, a few nights in a motel, and maybe, just maybe, a start. I didn't need more. Before heading to the new gate, I stopped by a trash can. I peeled off the Coral Vacation Nana t-shirt, folded it into a neat square, and pushed it deep inside, burying it under a pile of fast food wrappers. I turned off my phone. No frantic messages, no missed calls. Of course not. The boarding process was quiet. No one glanced twice at the old woman traveling alone with a small, worn leather carry-on. On the plane, I found my window seat and watched the lights of Wilmington fall away beneath me, a constellation of a life I was leaving behind. 8 hours ago, I thought I was going to paradise. Turns out, I was just being left behind. But now, as the plane banked west into the darkening sky, I felt a strange, quiet thrill. I was going somewhere real. Somewhere they couldn't follow. I landed in Portland just after 10 p.m. The airport was quieter than I remembered, the air imbued with a damp, earthy scent of pine and wet concrete that felt like a cleansing breath. I walked slowly through the terminal, not because of my age, but because the need to rush had evaporated. No one was waiting for me, and for the first time in a long, long time, that felt like freedom. Outside, under the awning, I stood for a minute, just breathing. I found a bench and sat down with my carry-on, the one Adam had once mocked for being old school. It was a rich brown leather, worn soft at the corners, a gift from Derek for our 25th anniversary. He would have seen the absurdity of what happened today. He would have let out a deep, knowing laugh, the kind that said, "Well, sweetheart, what did you expect?" I didn't expect this. Not exactly. But a part of me, a deep, silenced part, wasn't surprised. I opened my wallet. 2 cards, my ID, $76 in cash, and a small, folded piece of paper with an address I hadn't looked at in 50 years, 1849 Quinn Street. It was the address of my first apartment, the tiny one-bedroom Derek and I had rented right after we got married. I didn't know if the building still existed. I didn't even know why I'd tucked that slip of paper into my wallet before leaving home. But there it was. A breadcrumb from a life where I had been the protagonist. I called a cab and gave the driver the address of a cheap motel I'd found on the airport's complimentary Wi-Fi. When we pulled up to the Rose Garden Inn, I paid, took my key, and climbed the narrow, creaking stairs to the second floor. Room 207. The hallway smelled of bleach and tired stories. Inside, the room was small but immaculate. One double bed with a faded floral comforter, a single armchair, a television bolted to the wall. I washed my face in the sink, the water cold and shocking against my skin. I lay down on the bed fully clothed, the blanket scratchy against my arms, and slept without dreams. The next morning, I stood at the window watching a woman in a pink chenille robe walk her little white dog. She looked about my age, though perhaps a little sturdier in the shoulders, less stooped by the weight of expectation. I made coffee in the little machine on the nightstand and sat in the stiff chair, sipping it slowly. No one called. No one texted. I didn't check. I had nowhere to be. The realization was staggering. For decades, my time had belonged to others. To Adam, to Derek, to the grandchildren, to the PTA meetings I'd chaired 30 years ago. My schedule was a reflection of their needs. But now, my time was my own again. At 9, I left the motel and started walking. My legs ached, my left hip sent a low murmur of protest, but I kept going. The neighborhood was a mix of old bungalows with welcoming porches and small, modern apartment buildings. I stopped at a corner bakery that smelled of yeast and cinnamon. I bought a blueberry scone, and the woman behind the counter smiled when I handed her the exact change. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked, her voice warm. "I used to be. A very long time ago." "Well," she said, bagging my scone. "Welcome back." I wasn't sure if I was back. I wasn't even sure I belonged anywhere. But the words felt like a warm coat. I asked her where to find housing listings, and she pointed to a crowded corkboard by the door. I scanned the handwritten notes: dog walking services, a used bicycle for sale, guitar lessons. And then one caught my eye, written in a blocky, no-nonsense script on a yellow index card. Room for rent for quiet lady. Private room, shared kitchen. House is safe, near bus line. No nonsense, no drama. $400 per month. Call Joyce. I took a photo of the number with my phone, which I'd turned back on only for practical purposes. By noon, I'd walked 2 more blocks and found a park bench bathed in a sliver of unexpected sun. I called the number. The voice that answered was raspy, skeptical. "Yeah, I'm calling about the room for rent," I said. A long pause. "How old are you?" 77. "You clean?" "Yes." "No boyfriends, right?" I chuckled, a small, rusty sound. "Not in a very long time." "Well," she grumbled, a hint of something other than suspicion in her voice. "Come by at 4. 2185 East Stafford. Bring cash for the first week." Then she hung up. By 4 o'clock, I stood in front of a faded blue house with a peeling porch and wind chimes that sounded like someone gently tapping spoons together. A woman with a shock of silver hair, a cigarette in one hand, and a fat orange cat curled around her ankles opened the door. "You're the old lady?" she asked, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "I suppose I am," I replied. She stepped aside. "Come on in then. Let's see if we can tolerate each other." Joyce's house smelled like lavender and fried onions. It wasn't unpleasant, just lived in, like a home that valued comfort over perfection. She led me through a narrow hallway stacked high with books and magazines, into a small sitting room where the television was on mute. A crocheted afghan in shades of avocado and harvest gold lay folded over the arm of the sofa. "The room's upstairs," she said, gesturing with her cigarette. I followed her up the creaky stairs, one hand on the banister. The room at the end of the hall was small, with a twin bed, a nightstand, and a dresser that had seen better decades. But the window was wide, and the afternoon sun poured in, illuminating the dust motes in a way that felt almost holy. There was even a little desk with a worn wooden chair. "It's fine," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "It's lovely. $400 a month. I take it weekly. $100 a week. Cash. No checks, no credit cards, no sob stories." She looked me over again. "You don't seem like the sob story type." "No," I said. "Not anymore." She nodded, as if that were the correct answer to an unasked question. Kitchens shared. Bathrooms down the hall. No guests without warning. I like my quiet. "You cause trouble, you're out." "We clear." Crystal. She handed me a simple brass key. "You can move in tonight if you've got the first week's rent." I handed her 5 $20 bills from the envelope I'd tucked into my inner coat pocket. She folded them without counting. "You hungry?" she asked. I could eat, I admitted. Joyce made us grilled cheese sandwiches on thick-cut bread and poured tomato soup from a saucepan. We ate at the small kitchen table under a yellowed ceiling fan that spun with a lazy, rhythmic click. She didn't ask me a single question about where I came from or why I was there, which was the greatest kindness she could have offered. People always ask too soon, before you've had time to shape the story for yourself. She only said, "I hate eating alone." And I understood that well enough. After dinner, I unpacked in my little room. I'd only brought 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, my medications, and an old paperback novel I'd never finished. I laid everything out carefully in the dresser drawers, folding each item as if it were precious. Maybe it was. That night, I lay in the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of a house that was not mine, but was not hostile either. The ticking of a wall clock downstairs, the groan of floorboards as Joyce moved about, the distant sound of her talking softly to the cat. No one called. No one texted. I didn't check. In the morning, I made coffee before Joyce was up. The kitchen felt more familiar than my own back in Wilmington, perhaps because it didn't belong to people who only remembered me when they needed something. By the third day, I started exploring the neighborhood with purpose. 2 blocks down, there was a small corner cafe with a chalkboard sign propped on the sidewalk. Help wanted. Morning shift. Apply inside. I stood there for a long moment. I hadn't worked in over 15 years, but I was no stranger to early hours and endless coffee pots. Inside, the place was simple: 3 booths with cracked red vinyl, a long counter, and a few mismatched bar stools. A young woman in an apron was wiping down the counter. "You hiring?" I asked. She looked up surprised. "You want to apply?" "Yes," she called to the back. "Heather, someone here about the job." A stocky woman with her hair pulled back in a messy bun emerged, wiping her hands on her own apron. Her name tag read Heather. "You got experience?" she asked, her tone brisk. "I've run a household for 50 years, raised a son, and managed a budget that could make a CEO weep," I said. "I can make coffee, I can carry plates, and I don't call in sick." Heather stared at me for a beat, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. Then she shrugged. "Trial shift tomorrow. 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. You make it through that, we'll talk." That night, I ironed the only blouse I had that could still hold a crease. I went to bed early and stared at the ceiling for a long time. It had been less than a week since the airport, less than a week since I'd been left behind like forgotten luggage. But something had shifted inside me. I wasn't waiting anymore. Now, I was walking, working, beginning. And no one needed to know. Not yet. This life, this quiet, new, unexpected life, was mine. The cafe smelled of burnt toast and old hope. I arrived at 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes early. Heather arrived 10 minutes later, holding a travel mug and a set of keys on a rainbow lanyard. She unlocked the register and handed me an apron without ceremony. "Keep your hair tied back. No perfume. Refill cups without being asked. And if someone leaves less than $1 tip, that's on you, not them." I nodded. She looked at me for a moment, and her expression softened, just a fraction. "You nervous?" "No," I said. "I'm 77. I've buried a husband, raised a son who forgot my birthday 3 years in a row, and survived 5 colonoscopies. This is just coffee." Heather snorted, a sound like a surprised laugh. "Fair enough." By 7, the first wave of regulars drifted in: construction workers in dusty boots, nurses fresh off the night shift, older men who came for the cheap coffee and the company. I moved slowly but steadily. I remembered orders, poured coffee with a steady hand, and smiled without overdoing it. By 9, I found a rhythm. "Where'd they dig you up?" one of the men asked, his eyes crinkling kindly. "Same place they find everything worth keeping," I replied, wiping down his table. "The back shelf under a dusty blanket." He laughed and left a $5 tip. Heather watched from behind the counter. She didn't say much, just nodded once after the breakfast rush died down and handed me a clean towel. We finished at 11. She poured herself another cup of coffee and pointed to the stool next to her. "Sit." I did. "You did fine," she said. "Not great, but fine. You'll get better." She took a sip. "You're hired. Minimum wage plus tips. No health insurance, but the hours are steady. Weekday mornings are yours if you want them. That enough for you?" "It's more than enough." We sat in silence for a moment. "You got kids?" she asked, her gaze sideways. "They're traveling," I said simply. She nodded, as if this explained everything. "They always are." I walked back to Joyce's with sore feet and a strange sense of lightness. She was in the garden, pulling weeds in a faded t-shirt that said, "Don't talk to me before coffee." "Get the job," she called out without looking up. "I did." "Told you," she grunted. "They need people who show up." That night, we ate frozen pot pies and watched the news with the sound off. The cat, whose name I'd learned was Franklin, curled up in the space between us on the sofa. "You staying long?" Joyce asked during a commercial for prescription medication. "I don't know. You can stay as long as you pay the rent and don't hog the remote." "I don't even like the remote," I said. She smiled, a rare, genuine thing, and passed me the last cookie. Later, I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, holding my silent phone. I thought about turning it on, checking for messages, seeing if Adam had even noticed I was gone yet. I didn't. Instead, I pulled out the old paperback I'd brought with me and started again at the first page. The light from the little desk lamp was soft and warm against the walls. Outside, rain began to tap gently against the window pane. Inside, I wasn't someone's leftover. I wasn't a burden or a favor or an afterthought. I was a woman with a room, a job, a plate of food, and a quiet corner of her own. And it was enough. It had been nearly 3 weeks. 3 weeks since the airport lounge, since the cheap plastic water bottle Adam had pressed into my hand before disappearing. The phone stayed in the bottom drawer of my nightstand, wrapped in a clean handkerchief, like something sacred or dangerous. Joyce didn't ask. She wasn't the type. But one evening, while we sat shelling peas in the companionable silence of her kitchen, she said, "You hiding or healing?" I looked up from the colander, a fresh green pod in my hand. "Both," I admitted. She nodded once and went back to the peas. At the cafe, Heather had started saving me the crossword page from the morning paper. "You look like the kind of person who finishes what they start," was all she said. Arthur, a quiet widower with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed mustache, came in every morning at 9:10, always in the same gray windbreaker. He didn't flirt, not exactly, but he lingered. We talked about birds. He liked cardinals. I was partial to finches. We both agreed crows were smarter than people gave them credit for. One morning, he asked, "How come a woman like you is working the breakfast shift in a place like this?" I looked at him over the rim of the coffee pot. "Because someone left me at an airport lounge like a bag they didn't want to pay to check." He blinked, his gentle face clouding with concern. "I'm sorry," he said, and I knew he meant it. "Don't be," I replied, topping off his cup. I got on a better flight. That earned me a soft laugh. He reached for his cup, then paused. "You ever think of calling them?" "Every day," I said truthfully. "And every day I don't." He didn't press, just nodded and returned to his newspaper. One evening, Joyce came home with a stack of mail and tossed an envelope onto the kitchen table. "Something for you." It had no return address, just my name, Martha Harlow, written in a familiar, looping script. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, torn from a spiral notebook. "Grandma," it read. "Where are you? Dad and Lisa are freaking out. They said you disappeared. No one's heard from you. I've been checking your house every day. I miss you. Please just let me know you're okay." There was a phone number scribbled at the bottom. His number. A new one. I didn't need to see a signature. I knew the handwriting. Kieran, my oldest grandchild, the only one who used to visit without being prompted, the one who once spent an entire afternoon helping me build a birdhouse. He'd painted it a brilliant, defiant red and declared, "This will be the coolest place in the whole yard, Grandma." I sat with the letter in my lap, reading it twice. Then I folded it carefully and tucked it into the drawer of my nightstand. I didn't call. Not yet. But something inside me, a tightly coiled knot of hurt, began to soften. The next day, I turned on the phone. It buzzed with the frantic energy of a trapped moth. 32 missed calls. 18 voicemails. The oldest was from Lisa, her voice a high-pitched performance of panic. "Martha? We thought you were in the bathroom. Please call us, we're boarding." A lie as smooth and polished as her manicured nails. The rest were from Adam, his voice growing progressively more curt and tight. "Where are you, Mom? This isn't funny anymore." "Fine, do what you want." I deleted them all without listening to the end. But I saved Kieran's number. That much I could do. A few days later, he called. I stared at the screen, watched his name blink, and for the first time I answered. Grandma? His voice cracked, as if he wasn't sure I'd speak. I'm here, darling. A long, shaky breath on the other end. You're okay. I'm better than okay, I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. Where are you? Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I chose. He didn't beg me to come home. He didn't guilt me. He just said, I'm glad you're safe. I miss you. I miss you too, sweetheart. It was enough for now. No explanations, no apologies, just the clean, simple sound of someone who still wanted me in their life, not because I made birthday cakes or babysat on weekends, but because I, Martha, mattered. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, another letter arrived. The return address was Wilmington. The handwriting was Adam's, neat and angry. The envelope was thick. 6 pages. No greeting. Just, I cannot believe you did this. He accused me of orchestrating a disappearance, of making a scene through absence, of putting the family through unimaginable stress during their vacation. Lisa cried every single night, he wrote. The kids were confused. Do you have any idea how unfair that was to them? Not a word about the airport lounge. Not a word about asking me to wait. Not a mention of the 8 hours. Just the performance of pain, the careful rewriting of facts to cast himself as the victim. He ended the letter with, we're willing to talk, but only if you're ready to be reasonable. Reasonable. As if decades of being the family's silent, unpaid support staff had been unreasonable. As if finally choosing myself was a tantrum, not an act of survival. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. Joyce, who had been watching me read, didn't ask what it said. She just passed me a plate of toast and nodded toward the window where a storm was gathering. Looks like it's going to pour, she said. It was. That night, after Kieran called just to check in, telling me about a part-time job he'd gotten at a bookstore because, as he put it, books don't yell at you, I took the letter from Adam, a box of matches, and walked into the kitchen. I lit the first page and dropped it into the stainless steel sink, watching the neat, angry words curl into black ash. Joyce came in, saw what I was doing, and didn't flinch. I would have used the fire pit in the backyard, she said. More satisfying. By the time the last page was gone, the air smelled of smoke and freedom. I had finally stopped waiting for an apology and started accepting the truth. The days were getting shorter now, dusk settling around the house like an old, soft quilt. I had my job, my room, my quiet friendships. My coat, a handsome navy wool I'd bought with my own earnings from a secondhand shop, hung by the door, warm and ready. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone waiting for life to start again. It had already started, quietly and without permission. And it was mine. The newspaper article arrived a week later, forwarded by a former neighbor who clearly relished the drama. Joyce slid the manila envelope across the kitchen table with a raised eyebrow. You got fans now? I opened it to find a printout from the community section of the Wilmington paper. The headline read, Missing Matriarch, Family Speaks Out on Grandmother's Disappearance. There was a photo of me from a Thanksgiving 2 years prior, holding a pie dish, my smile looking strained even in the grainy newsprint. The article quoted Adam extensively. We're deeply worried, he'd said. She vanished without a word. We just want her home safe. Lisa had a quote too, full of tremulous concern. She's vulnerable. We fear something has happened. She's not the type to do something like this. I laughed. A sharp, startling sound that made Franklin jump. Not the type. Joyce leaned over my shoulder. They really said vulnerable? They did. You should sue them for underestimation, she grumbled. I kept the clipping, not as a wound to be picked at, but as evidence. Proof that their concern was a performance, a tool to regain control. The following Monday, a man in a suit was waiting outside the cafe when my shift ended. Mrs. Martha Harlow, he asked, his tone smooth and professional. I am. My name is Derek Sorensen. I'm an attorney representing Adam and Lisa Harlow. They've asked me to speak with you regarding your well-being and your assets. My assets. The small house Derek and I had paid off decades ago. The modest savings I'd carefully guarded. My well-being is excellent, I said, folding my apron and placing it on the counter. And my assets are none of your business. He cleared his throat. They're very concerned, Mrs. Harlow. They'd like to ensure you're in a safe environment. Possibly discuss some next steps. Tell Adam and Lisa I am not a lost pet they forgot to pick up from the kennel, I said, my voice low and steady. And there are no next steps unless I am the one taking them. I walked past him and out the door, leaving him blinking in the afternoon sun. That evening I wrote a short, simple letter to Lisa. I know what you did. I know what you didn't say. I'm not angry. I'm not coming back. Take care of your own life now. I've finally started mine. I mailed it the next morning with a stamp that had a small, cheerful finch on it. I expected silence. What I got was Lisa, in person, 2 days later. She showed up at the cafe on a gray Thursday afternoon, looking out of place in her tailored cashmere coat. I let her wait, wiping down the counter, refilling sugar caddies, until she finally approached me. Martha. Lisa. Can we talk? She asked. Privately? We sat in the back booth. I didn't know Adam was sending a lawyer, she began. That wasn't my idea. No, I said. But leaving me in an airport lounge was. Her eyes, for the first time, looked genuinely pained. We panicked, she whispered. The flight was boarding, the kids were cranky, we thought you were right behind us. I held up a hand. 8 hours, Lisa. You never called. You never checked. You never looked back. She looked down at her perfectly manicured hands. I didn't think you'd actually leave. I didn't, I corrected her gently. You did. The silence between us was heavy with all the unspoken things. Then she looked up, her polished mask cracking just enough to show the tired, insecure woman beneath. I wasn't trying to replace you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't want your shadow in every room. It was the closest thing to honesty I had ever heard from her. It wasn't an apology, but it was a truth. I'm not your shadow, Lisa, I said, standing up. I'm my own person. And I finally remembered how to be one. She left without finishing her coffee. That night, sitting on the porch with Joyce, I felt a profound sense of peace. The battle wasn't over, but my part in it was. The next day, I went to the bank. I transferred a small sum of money from my secret account to Kieran, with a note that said, for books or groceries, or a one-way ticket if you ever need one. No strings attached. It felt good. Not like revenge, but like closure. Like planting a seed in the only part of the garden that was still fertile. Joyce turned 70 on a Tuesday. I baked a chocolate cake. We ate it on the porch, wrapped in old quilts, watching the moon rise. You know, she said, you've been here almost 2 months. I know. Planning to stay? I looked out at the quiet street, at the soft glow of the streetlights on the wet leaves. Yes. She nodded. Good. This house is too quiet without someone else to yell at the cat. A few days later, a letter came for me. The handwriting was Kieran's. Grandma, I'm coming to Portland. I want to see you. I'm not bringing anyone. I just want to talk. I'm staying at the Red Fern Motel on Maple, room 12. If you want to come by, I'll be there Friday and Saturday. If not, I'll understand. Friday morning, I dressed carefully. Not for him, but for me. The navy coat, a clean blouse, a touch of lipstick the color of dried cherries. I knocked on the door of room 12, and he opened it immediately, as if he'd been waiting with his hand on the knob. He was taller than I remembered, with a light scruff on his jaw, but the same gentleness was in his eyes. Hi, Grandma. Hi, sweetheart. We sat and talked for hours. About small things and big things. About his job at the bookstore, about my job at the cafe, about how freedom tasted when no one was watching you eat. I think about you a lot, he said finally. You were the only person who ever made me feel like I was enough, just by sitting beside me. I reached over and took his hand. You always were enough. You still are. We didn't cry. We didn't need to. We didn't say goodbye when I left, just hugged, a long, quiet embrace in the hallway of a tired motel. It wasn't an ending or a beginning. It was just a continuation of the one bond that had never been broken. The next morning, I walked to the cafe. The air was crisp, the sky a pale, promising blue. Heather handed me a new apron she'd found. It was deep forest green, with stitched white lettering that read, "Not your grandma's kitchen." I laughed, a loud, full sound that made Arthur look up from his booth and raise his coffee mug in a silent toast. After my shift, I walked home slowly. The world felt new, or maybe I was. Joyce was in the kitchen, a pot of something fragrant simmering on the stove. Franklin headbutted my shin in greeting. "Made soup," Joyce announced. "Hope you're hungry." And I was. Hungry, free, and unafraid. Everything I hadn't been in years. That night, I took out a blank note card and a pen. "Dear me," I wrote. "You waited so long for someone to save you, you forgot you were always the one holding the key. You didn't lose them. They let you go. And you finally let go back. And look at the life that opened. Well done." I taped it to the inside of my dresser drawer, a quiet promise to myself. I wasn't abandoned. I was released. I didn't rebuild my life. I built a new one from scratch, with better materials. And if this story found you at the right moment, don't wait for the perfect sign. Be your own sign. Your own noise in the silence. Your own one-way ticket out of the lounge.